in the north, followed by more persistent rain later, much drier further south.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun every Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio
and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Hello and welcome, I'm Alastair Stewart, and for the next 2 hours I'll be keeping you company on TV and radio with the stories that really matter across the country. Coming up, the fallout from that budget continues. What is Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng's plan supposed to achieve, and can it still achieve it? I'll also be asking how all of this affects you. What's it done to the housing market, to mortgages and to pensions? Plus, Britain goes off the rails again on yet another day of strikes. We'll be getting the picture right across the country. All of that and more to come here on GB News. And as always, we want to hear from you this morning and this afternoon. Do get in touch with me via gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me direct or tweet GB News @GBNews. Few, if any of you, will have known such a complete crisis for a government in living memory. A huge tax-cutting budget judged toxic by most who pollsters talk to. The city flirting with meltdown as it digested what it could make of it all. The Bank of England chucking billions at the markets to stop the mortgage market and the pensions industry either grinding to a halt, collapsing, or, frankly, a bit of both. The official watchdog, the Office for Budget Responsibility, offered to give an assessment of the costs and effectiveness of the measures, only to be told, no thank you, and ending up in unusual private talks at Number 10 yesterday. And it's just been announced that they'll be meeting again on Friday. Tory backbenchers openly calling for a rethink, and Labour claiming they'd virtually been handed the keys to Number 10. Or is it all media-generated hyperbole? Is the budget the way forward, poised to kick in and launch a new era of growth and prosperity? Well, the kick-in starts, in a way, today. As those new energy prices start, so too does the energy price guarantee, reducing household energy bills over the next 2 years, with a typical family paying around £2,500, a saving of around £1,000 a year. Households will also see the first instalment of the £400 energy bill support scheme in their October electricity bills. Businesses and charities and public sector organisations will pay less than half the expected prices this winter under their energy bill relief scheme. Now, the government says that energy support package in all its glory is the largest single component of their growth plan, protecting jobs, they say, and livelihoods, and curbing inflation by 5%. Certainly the costliest, dwarfing the tax cuts by a long way. Business and Energy Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg said, while Putin's weaponisation of energy has driven energy prices to record highs, we will not let his regime harm this country's businesses and households. Well, today we're going to look at that budget, the safety net measures and the politics of it all, with top guests, as always. And as I said, right at the very top, we really do want to know what you think. How worried are you? Does the budget give you hope? Is it just wrong-headed in your view? What would you do if you were in charge? So let's hear what you think. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk with any comments you may have on the stories that we're covering today. We are also on Twitter and on Facebook. Now, I made a conscious decision to start with, as it were, a voice of youth. First-time buyers have been really hard hit by the meltdown in the mortgage market, and in so many ways, they are, of course, the future. So I scratched my little head and thought of Letis Bromowski, who's a political commentator and who I talked to back in the summer about the Conservative leadership race, and she made it pretty clear where she stood. She is a free marketeer and is all for economic liberalism. Welcome back, and I'm glad you could fit us in.
Hello, Alastair.
It's a troubling one, because you can read any number of newspapers and you'll get very, very different views. But this is supposed to be the budget that will economically liberate, because it's for economic liberals like yourself. Low tax, small state, get out there and get on with it. It's gone down like a Led Zeppelin.
It has, completely agree with that. However, the economic principles, the core economic principles at the centre of this, I fully support, and they should be supported by many. What Liz Truss is trying to do is she's challenging this economic orthodoxy that we've seen, particularly since the financial crash in 2008, where we've had very high quantitative easing methods coupled with very low interest rate.
That's pumping a lot of cash into the economy.
And sort of creating
as much as anything after the crash in 2007-8.
Yeah, exactly. And creating this sort of phony sense of growth. But since then, we've had, 1% growth each year, and we've got, because of COVID, a massive bill of about £500 billion. This has to be challenged with real, substantial and sustainable growth. And that's what this budget, I think, will do. However, as you say, it's gone down like a bit of a lead balloon.
OK, pause there, and I'm going to put exactly the same question to Julian Jessup, who's coming on in a moment. How is it supposed to work? How is it supposed to generate, frankly, a modest ambition of 2.5% growth, which used to be the kind of norm, by taking the cap off bankers' bonuses, by cutting away that top rate of 45%, but only giving the vast majority of people a penny off income tax and reversing the national insurance increase? How is that supposed to suddenly kickstart this economy?
Well, I think the idea that this is only a budget for the rich people is entirely a gross misconception, really. What we're seeing, particularly with taking the cap off bankers' bonuses, there is still a cap in the Eurozone. So bankers from Europe will come over to us, and those bonuses, they're always going to be taxed, so they will be getting more money in from that. On top of that, the largest sum in this budget was the energy price cap, which was about 60 billion roundabout, and that's helping every single person in this country deal with their energy bills. Yes, the 1p off wasn't as high as some people hoped for. There is another sort of mini budget, as you can say, coming very soon. And hopefully, I'm hoping to see a few things. Maybe a cut in VAT would be something I would want to see on that next budget. But I think that there is a real chance here, if you bring down that top rate of tax, there is more investment for entrepreneurial spirit, perhaps, and people are more likely to to throw themselves into risk and opportunity. And we've got from previous imperial evidence from 2014 when George Osborne brought down that top rate of tax from 50 to 45, it did bring in a higher
I don't dispute
take
that. I mean, it was the scale that I was slightly concerned about. But you said earlier on in that answer about the level of debt that was troubling, that needed to be dealt with. That stuff I just read out about energy bills, which you praise quite rightly, and so do I, and so does everybody else who's picking up some of that. You know, that's going to add another 100+ billion to that debt.
Yes.
The income tax. They wouldn't even sit down with the Office for Budget Responsibility and say, if we do this, that will happen.
Yeah.
I mean, I have never in all my years seen a government flying blind.
That was a total error on the government's part, and I completely agree with that. The communication that we have seen over this last week has been so poor and has had such a massive impact on the volatility of the markets. From when it was announced last Friday to then Kwasi Kwarteng on Sunday coming out and saying, he didn't convince the markets at all. When you're trying to challenge the Treasury orthodoxy like they're seeing, you need to bring people along with you. You need to have that confidence. Yeah. And we saw that absolute horror car crash that was Liz Truss's interviews that happened yesterday. I mean, it seemed like she didn't even know what was going on, let alone what her budget had said. And even to the point when she was asked about fracking, I think, in Lancashire, BBC Radio, you could hear the sort of rustle of papers from her aides. I mean, this is ridiculous. We need greater confidence, and that comes through communication. And really, the government's got to step it up a lot in order to convince people that this is the right direction.
You observe economics closely, and you observe politics even more closely. Is this the Rishi Sunak camp saying, told you so, and rocking the boat? Because when we talked before about the leadership election, it was crystal clear what Truss would do if she won, and she's done it. And it was crystal clear what Rishi would do if he won, and that would be to encourage the Bank of England to up interest rates even higher than they are right now to curb inflation. He's hardly said a word, but lots of his chums have. Are they sitting there saying, nah, Mayor, told you?
Well, I think I sort of hate that argument in many ways because I find it's kind of redundant and unhelpful. I do believe that if Rishi Sunak was in power, we would be in probably a worse off position than we are now. Rishi Sunak was purely the continuation of Boris Johnson, and it wasn't going anywhere, and we needed that real bold change. Like I remember when I was last on here with you, we need a change of direction to get away from this sort of low-growth stagnation. We forget so easily where we were just a few months ago with the fear of recession looming, the energy bills, war in Ukraine. Everything was sort of tumbling down around us. We had to change, and it takes dramatic change to get away from where we were then.
Final point. We did a GB People's poll over the last few days. And like all of the other polls at the moment, it shows Labour top 40, round about 50, and the Tories down below 30. And there's a pattern emerging there. But I spotted within it something that I wanted to put to you directly, having given you that intro, as it were. There's only about 5 to 7% of your generation who'd consider voting Conservative now. And this budget is supposed to be about your future, about your first-time buying, about the interest rate you'll pay, getting a house, getting a job, and seeing the economy get back to better times. 5 to 7% of your generation buy it.
Yeah, I feel that seems dismally low, and it's not necessarily my personal experience of it. However, I think it speaks to the wider issue of disillusionment amongst the young with politics on the whole. You know, they feel like they're not being heard and their voices aren't being included in budgets like this, for example, and you need more to support the next generation. So I don't think there's necessarily a swing that those other 95% are going to Labour. I think just many are a bit like, we need better change, or we need better direction, perhaps.
All right, and any opinion polls, only a snapshot of what's happening right now. Tomorrow could be entirely different. I've asked you to do two things. One is stay where you are and listen to Alan Duncan, who's up next, and then Julian Jessup, and give your thoughts on what they have to say. And then come back at 1 o'clock and we'll have a further natter. But for the time being, Lettice, thank you very much indeed. Lettice Bromowski there, political commentator, and as I say, she will be back in the show. As I've just said, I'm delighted to confirm that Sir Alan Duncan is next up. Alan is a former Conservative Member of Parliament and indeed Cabinet Minister, a been-there, done-it man. Alan, great to see you this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed. I'll come to the political turbulence in a moment, if I may. But first of all, straight question, what did you make of the Kwarteng budget?
Well, I think what it did was it just sort of cleared the decks, I think, of all of those sort of irritating taxes a lot of Conservatives over the last 15 or so years have not liked, but at the wrong time in the wrong way, and into markets which were fragile and jittery. And so it has been a colossal disaster. There was no explanation or philosophical justification made in advance. He'd sacked the permanent secretary of the Treasury. So it looked like ill-judged arrogance, and I'm afraid the judgment of people is going to be very, very harsh. And the issue we'll come to in a minute, I think, is that judgment just going to evaporate over time, or is it now so deeply entrenched in their thinking that there's no way back for the government?
We will indeed come to precisely that in just a moment, but just two further steps to get to that point, as it were. The city is a world that you know in your business life as well as in your political life. Do you think that there is any way in which the city can be squared? Because the bottom line is they will lend almost any amount of money if the price is right, and that means interest rates go up. And if we can do that and find a way of doing it, can they be squared and come on side and become supportive?
No, I don't think so. They will act within the markets they operate in rationally. And the inevitable consequence of what happened last week is that people are going to pay more because interest rates are going to go up, the pound is under strain. And what this has done, what this budget, if you call it that, has done, is to magnify the market and price pressure, which was already there. I mean, the markets were very, very fragile. They were very, very sort of awkwardly placed. And this has stressed, if you like, and this has played into that mood and exaggerated everything. So there is no way, for instance, if you use the word squared to mean that whereas the pound might have settled back, mortgage interest rates will not. And again, we'll come to the politics in a minute, but I think this is so difficult and dangerous now for the government that people have it in their head, and it's not going to go away, that the government will be to blame for their economic pain. You can't blame it on Putin anymore, is what they will think. And that, I think, means that the government is going to be in a very, very difficult position.
On the turbulence, then, Liz Truss, as I've just said to Lettuce, throughout her leadership election said this is exactly what she was going to do, and she's done it. I mean, in that sense, why the political turbulence? You must have seen it coming.
Well, first of all, I think that the nature of journalism during the leadership election was very shallow. It didn't adequately probe leadership candidates on anything very much. It just tried to trip them up on whether they were going to reverse the national insurance decrease or not. So what you have is not really a properly rolled philosophy. I mean, what you've got is a government not understanding that if you have an ideological point of view, you can only implant it at a time that is ready and happy to receive it. So what they've done is they've just dumped this ideological thinking, much of which is perfectly valid in the long term. And we were hearing it articulated a moment ago, perfectly good thinking, I share it. But the judgment of doing it at a time where we've had COVID, we've got a Ukraine war, all of the inflationary pressures across the world are difficult. We've already got very high borrowing. Suddenly, to increase borrowing by many tens of billions has dramatically spooked the markets. Now, there's no turning back on that. As I said, people, whereas they might have said, OK, Putin has screwed up our life, are now going to blame the government entirely for the mortgages they either cannot get or cannot pay.
Alan, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for your reflections and for your time. I hope you have a splendid rest of your weekend. Always good to talk to you. Thank you. So Alan Duncan there, former Member of Parliament and former Cabinet Minister. I said Lettuce will be back after both of my guests have spoken, but I've going to bring her in straight away. Because that was a lovely thumbs up from Sir Alan for your analysis. But his killer point is not now. Why do it now when the market's not ready for it, when the economy's not ready for it? And as Alan said, the world of politics wasn't really ready for it either.
Well, completely, and he definitely has a point there, but it goes back to my point that there's sort of never a good time to completely reform this whole thing. I bring it up, for example, in 1981, when Margaret Thatcher introduced her 1981 budget. At the time, again, that went against all the economic sort of consensus that had been going since the post-war period. And in fact, 364 economists wrote in saying this is going to be entirely ruinous for the fiscal and monetary policy. And yet that was sort of the cornerstone now, when we look back in hindsight, of the boom that proceeded in the 1980s. And I'm not saying that that's exactly what this is going to be, but I think that although there's a lot of critical evidence, that core economic principles remain the same, and that's what's going to give us growth.
All right, let us... Again, Julian's up next, and I'll come back to you after he's spoken. Julian being Julian Jessup, former Treasury man, independent economist now, and very significantly a fellow at the Institute of Economic Affairs, one of the think tanks, it is said, and the Telegraph have done a very good piece on it this morning, whose fingerprints are all over this budget. As a radical rejection of Treasury orthodoxy, to quote Liz Truss back, it's gone down like a Led Zeppelin, Julian.
Well, I mean, I find this really frustrating, and actually, just to pick up on points that both Lettice and Alan made, I think the overall strategy is exactly right. Three big things have happened. One is the energy price guarantee, which is easing at least some of the burden on households and businesses. I think without that, we would have been facing a very deep recession and much higher rates of inflation. The second thing is that the cancellation of the planned tax increases. You know, I think whatever you think about the longer-term health of the finances, it made no real sense to be increasing national insurance and increasing corporation tax in the middle of a big downturn like this. And then the final element is the start of a meaningful package of what economists call supply-side reforms. So this is about boosting productivity and raising long-term economic growth, which is the key to prosperity and real wages and investment and all those sorts of things. So the overall strategy, I think, has been brilliant, but there are one or two really big missteps.
On exactly that point, because I agree with you absolutely on 1 and 2, but let me take number 3 and add to it as well. That by not detailing yet those vital supply-side measures about planning, about energy generation and all the rest of it, at the same time as not publishing an OBR paper that says this is how the sums will work, it was Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng who shot themselves jointly in the foot. It was there for the taking, and to use the vernacular, they screwed up.
Yeah, that's the polite version, the way that I've heard it put by others. I think the key point here is if the budget had simply stuck to what we were expecting, namely the energy price guarantee details, the cancellation of the planned tax increases, and the broader agenda of supply-side reform, I think that would have landed reasonably well. Indeed, most economists, including those who are no fans of the government, have praised those elements of the package. The problem was going that little bit further, and the unanticipated announcement of additional tax cuts without the cover of the accompanying analysis from the Office of Budget Responsibility. I think if they had waited on those tax cuts until a full fiscal event or budget, whatever you like to call it, in November or maybe even the spring of next year, with the OBR analysis, I think the market reaction would have been very different, potentially much more positive.
I'd take that point as well. On interest rates and market reaction, quite an important question to me, and I've tried to think about it over the last 2 or 3 days. Interest rates are basically the price of borrowing. So the city says to Her Majesty's government, if you want 180 billion as opposed to 100 billion, it's going to cost you more. I can completely understand that. It applies to all of us in our private dealings as well. My nightmare is there also an element of premium within those interest rates, saying the city is now beginning to believe that these are not gilt-edged securities, they are brass-edged securities? This is a government losing its creditworthiness.
Well, I think you're absolutely right to ask why are interest rates going up, and the reality is that interest rates are going up all around the world because the economy has rebounded from the COVID pandemic, and inflation is a problem, and central banks, particularly the US central bank, have been raising interest rates aggressively. So, in fact, the Bank of England is one of the few major central banks that hasn't raised rates by at least 1 3/4 point move. So a lot of this is a global move, and to some extent that the Bank of England has been behind the pack. We do have some additional problems in the UK. One is the turmoil in the pensions industry, which is very hard to explain. But a lot of that, I think, is due to mismanagement, actually by the Bank of England and also by the Financial Conduct Authority. So there's a problem, particularly in the pensions market. But the reality is, interest rates have been too low for too long, and they do need to rise to more normal levels. I think in practice, the markets have panicked, they've overshot, and there's lots of talk of interest rates going to levels which I think are far higher than are actually likely, and that in turn has led to this sort of stop in the mortgage market because mortgage providers have not been able to price their products properly. But there are now signs that the market is calming down, and here I am going to give credit to the Bank of England for their intervention this week to buy bonds and soften the reassure the markets that gilt yields aren't going to surge. But I think this is a temporary move, interest rates returning towards more sustainable levels in the context of an economy, hopefully, that will be a lot stronger.
Yeah, sure. Because in terms of the politics of it, and you know this as well, having worked in that world as well as being a number-crunching economist, if your measures as a government impact negatively upon pensioners, and you then find that you may even have to review the uprating of benefits. I think the jury seems to be out on the pensions, or then Kwasi is trying to say it will still be inflation and not wage levels, although the rest of people on benefits may not have such good news. And at the other end of the spectrum, your policies as a government are impacting people like Lettice at the beginning of the housing ladder, trying to be first-time buyers. Any saving on energy is going to go out the window because it's all going to be eaten up by higher interest rates that you have to pay, whether it's on your credit card or much, much more importantly, on your mortgage.
Well, I mean, right, there's a good example of how turmoil in the financial markets can affect people in the real world. It's not just something that traders are worrying about. But if we did get a sustained rise in government borrowing costs and also in mortgage rates, that would clearly undo a lot of the good being done by the government in terms of supporting demand through energy price bill caps and through tax cuts. So there's definitely a risk there of an alternative doom loop from the one that we might otherwise have been trapped in. But I would be pretty confident actually that financial markets are now starting to calm down. And there have been a number of positive things that have happened. So the government has confirmed that there will be a proper medium-term fiscal plan with proper OBR analysis alongside it. The Bank of England, quite rightly, has not been panicked into an emergency rate rise to support the pound, which probably wouldn't have worked anyway. Interest rates will rise, but I think they're going to be sort of measured increases, taking interest rates back to more normal and healthy levels. And I think that's a reasonable trade-off. I think the alternative of remaining in recession and having lower interest rates would be a lot worse than having a stronger economy than we would otherwise have done and higher interest rates. So I think it's important to view this as a rebalancing from a position where interest rates were too low and growth was too low to a position where growth will be stronger and interest rates higher.
We will keep an eye on it, as I know you and colleagues will, and I hope very much you'll be able to find time for us again, twixt now and November the 23rd, as many times as you like, Julian. It's always a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed for your wisdom and experience there. Julian Jessup there, who's been in the Treasury and Institute of Economic Affairs and all the rest of it. I'm going to say it bluntly, and he won't mind my saying it because I suspect he's still hearing. A lot more blunt than I expected. I thought he would be universally defensive of it. He recognises there were quite profound errors made. Yeah, definitely, and there were significant errors made. I think one point that he made there, which I thought was very interesting, is that this is a global issue. All we've seen a lot in the media is this cycle of it being very UK-focused, very doom and gloom about the pound going down. But we've got to remember that although the pound came close to parity with the dollar, the euro actually slipped below it on Tuesday to, I think, 0.97, 0.98, something like that. And the implication from him very clearly that the Bank of England should have acted sooner, faster, rather than 100%. Dabbling at the edge of it. Let us still come back at 1 o'clock. Lots for you to reflect upon. I see you've completed one side of A4. I'm sure there'll be more later on. Great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. So Alan Duncan there and Julian Jessup. Great lineup, and Lettice at the beginning and commentating on it throughout. You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and indeed Friends, with lots more coming up on today's programme, including, have your plans been changed today by the rail strikes? Many train services have been disrupted and been cancelled due to rail workers staging more strikes over pay and, importantly, their working conditions. Our reporters are out and about around the country with the very latest. But first, we're going to have a quick break. Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking to see a mix of sunshine, rather blustery showers with some heavy downpours in places. Let's have a look at some more detail there. Most of those showers in Scotland will affect northern and western parts, where they'll be accompanied by strong and gusty winds. Meanwhile, Inverness will join many eastern parts with a brighter afternoon. A fair few showers will rattle eastwards across Northern Ireland, and it'll generally feel cool in the breeze with highs of just 16 degrees. The northwest of England will also have a cool and showery afternoon, but northeast England will be more sheltered and should have more sunshine. Showers will be well scattered across Wales and mostly confined towards the north and west. In the sunnier spells towards the south and east, it shouldn't feel too bad despite that breeze. Occasional showers are possible across the Midlands, but some places in the east should stay dry. There'll be some bright or sunny spells, lifting temperatures to around 17 or 18 degrees Celsius, the low 60s Fahrenheit. Plenty of bright weather is on the cards across East Anglia as well, with just an outside chance of a shower feeding across in the westerly breeze. And from the south coast of England, rather cloudy with a few showers, but a little inland it should be mostly dry, with the sun at times. In the evening, showers, largely dry and clear periods. And that is how your weather is looking. We'll update it as we progress through the day.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV.
On radio.
and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's
News channel.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today.
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun every Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV.
On radio.
and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's
News channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
28 minutes to 1, and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News TV, radio and online. The transport union leaders say that they've no choice over a mass walkout which has brought the rail network to a halt today. Members of 4 trade unions are striking for 24 hours over jobs, pay and pensions. It's causing the worst rail disruption of the year so far. And Network Rail have described it as an own goal. Well, we'll be crossing live to our reporters right across the country this afternoon to find out how it is impacting upon you. So, first up is our East Midlands reporter, Will Hollis, who's at Derby Railway Station. Predictably very, very quiet behind you, but have people been turning up hoping that there might be a train run by managers, or maybe it was all just got up by the media and there wasn't a strike? What have people been saying to you, Will?
Yes, well, I've been here since the wee hours of this morning, since about 6 a.m. and there was people outside waiting to get trains back to Nottingham and various other places, and I had to explain to them that no, there's a strike on and that they're going to find it much harder to get around. I've had a lot of people asking where National Express is in Derby today because they're looking at alternative forms of transport. Just to give you the real big picture, only 11% of trains are running up and down the country today. Some train stations are closed completely and some operators aren't running any trains. Here in the East Midlands, there are still some running. It's about 1 train every hour on what we call the intercity route. So that's places like Leicester, Derby, Sheffield, Nottingham, and then transporting people down to London. So that's half as many trains for those types of routes, but pretty much the smaller routes are gone completely. There are still some people coming in and out of the train station, which is over on my left. Over on my right, though, you can see members of those unions that have been on a picket line since about 7 a.m. this morning. When I say members of the unions, that's because, as you say, Alastair, quite rightly, there are 4 unions that are on strike today in this closely coordinated action. In the past, it's been 1, maybe 2 unions at the same time, or 2 unions across a space of a week. But this week, today, it's the RMT, the biggest union, ASLEF, the Drivers' Union, Unite the Union and the TSSA. And all of that adds up to around 54,000 people that are on strike, so you can really understand the impact, and it is going to have a big impact.
Yeah. And they've also, and I was talking to, I think it was the Deputy General Secretary of the RMT yesterday on GB News, and they're trying to stress the fact that it's cost of living as well. It's not just their pay and conditions, but they are kind of holding hands, as it were, with the Communication Workers Union and other people. It's not a general strike, nowhere near it, but they are trying to have a united front, not only on the railways.
Yes, very much so. So there's been lots of coverage around all these kind of strikes. I think a lot of people watching the news might feel strike saturation, and maybe that is having that negative effect and forcing them to turn away. You can see on your news channels up and down the country, there are what they're calling enough is enough marches, demonstrations, where all of these unions are coming together with maybe local MPs, people that support these kinds of causes, and they're really campaigning on that point about cost of living. Because any of the conversations that I've had with union leaders and press officers and all those sorts of people, what they say is that they want a pay offer that's something in line with inflation, and it's always been around that 9%, 10% mark at the moment. So until they see those sorts of offers, whether it's Unite, Communication Workers Union or RMT, I think we are going to see many more months of these strikes for the near future.
Where we began, those folk who did turn up, hoping, fingers crossed, that there might be a train, only to be disappointed. Would you, as a reporter, describe their attitude as angry or shrug of the shoulder?
I think it's been a little bit of a mixture. I think there are some people that were clearly quite frustrated, maybe not anger, but they were a little bit frustrated, a little bit more concerned with how they were going to get around. There was certainly one couple that seemed to be having a little bit of an argument, and it seemed that was because they were trying to get their way back to Birmingham. But what other relationship problems they might have, I couldn't possibly comment on.
The ever-perceptive reporter Will Hollis there. We don't want to go into that, entirely a matter for them, but there we are. Will, I'm sorry, the bad news is you've got to stay where you are, and any further developments, you come back to us, and we will be talking to you once again. But for the time being, thanks very much indeed. Will Hollis there, GB News East Midlands reporter in Derby. Let's cross down now, head south, and cross to Alice Porter, who is GB News' London reporter, and she is at King's Cross Station, bustling more there with picket lines. But what about people turning up hoping that there might have been a train?
Hello there, Alastair. Yes, well, I have to say, I think it is going to be the autumn of discontent. There are a number of people who've come to get trains only to be sorely disappointed. I mean, I think the only thing is the message has got out and there aren't as many people trying to get trains as I think they were hoping to, but there are no trains going from London to any major cities. And of course, on a Saturday, many people wanting to go out and about, but that is definitely not possible because, as Will was just saying there, we've got all the major train unions which have joined up for the first time ever, and 54,000 members are striking today. So it's causing a huge amount of disruption on the lines. But also alongside that, as though for those of you watching kind of see behind me, we've got lots of different picket lines with all sorts of different unions. We've got the education union here who have come here as well. We've got people from the NHS, people from Insulate Britain. So there's lots of different kind of, I suppose, groups with slightly different interests. But when it comes to it, a lot of them are frustrated at this cost of living crisis and are calling on the government, particularly before the Tory party conference, which we know starts on Monday in Birmingham, are really urging train for the government.
The other thing that I'm hearing from a lot of people, I mean, one-to-one personal contacts of mine, who would have been heading for where you are now, maybe they're in Birmingham, Manchester, or even up in Scotland, who are going to be taking part in the London Marathon, and they can't now do that. I mean, the unions, in effect, they're taking their strike action over cost of living and the rest of it, but they are stopping other people raise money for good causes and charities. Do they not get that?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, that's actually a question I actually just put before speaking to you now to Mick Lynch from RMT, and he said this is obviously regrettable with the timing, and I think it's interesting they've chosen not to do the strike tomorrow. And I think people I've interviewed before have done the London Marathon. I don't think a strike action will stop them getting there because they're just the most wonderfully determined people. But of course, it's an additional challenge that a lot of people don't need when they're trying to raise money for important causes, with many of those charities having suffered over the last few years for the pandemic. The optics on that aspect, I think in particular, is not good for the unions.
No, absolutely. And if they're going to come down by train first thing tomorrow, anywhere north of Watford, they're going to have to get up blooming early. But we wish them well. I agree with your point there. Alice, keep in touch. Same as I said to Will. Sorry, the bad news is you're stuck there. But if there are any further developments, you get right back in touch with us, and look forward to talking to you again. Alice Porter there, GB News London reporter, live from King's Cross Station. It's 20 minutes to 1. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends. We've plenty more still to come this afternoon. Yesterday, President Putin formally annexed 4 areas in Ukraine following what the West called sham referendums. Since then, President Zelensky submitted an accelerated application to join NATO. We'll be discussing what that could mean right next. But first, a quick break.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
On radio and online.
we're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's
News channel.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
On radio and online.
we're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's
News channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back. Just coming up to 1:15. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News TV and radio. I asked you at the top of the show to get in touch with emails on our big topics of the day, the economy and mortgages, and you have. And how? Tony says, in terms of the mini budget, it's really simple. Would you rather tax 45% of 1 million or 40% of 5 million? Basic maths, to be honest. Lower tax rates bring companies and people into your pot. Lawrence says the Bank of England is reacting a little to the mini-budget, but you're also correct in mentioning the United States interest rate rises, which one or two of my guests did as well, Lawrence. The bank would have had to intervene with or without the mini-budget, as markets were already betting against inflation rises on all major currencies. Horatio says, I bought my first house in the 1980s. In the 1990s, my boss advised me to stretch and get a bigger house. Great advice. It was hard work, but like others, we got there. I never, ever considered help from the government. We adjusted. Jim says we've enjoyed nearly 20 years of historic low interest rates, so what the hell are people complaining about? Well, I guess it's understandable, Jim, if suddenly, for the first time, particularly younger people, that's why I wanted to talk to people like Lettuce and get their views. If you're just starting and you think it's going to be at that low level, you may not have done all the sums and not know the economic history as well as others do, that suddenly seeing those mortgage rate quotes in the market, double, even treble, it is going to be a bit of a shocker. But I read it out. You're absolutely right. 20 years of historic low interest rates. Life gets tough and tougher. More of that to come a little later on. Do keep those views coming in and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are at GB News, and I thoroughly recommend Sir Alan Duncan and Julian Jessup earlier this afternoon. Absolutely spellbinding stuff and really, really significant. Now, one of the other big stories yesterday and again today, not unrelated to our economic and energy worries, was Vladimir Putin holding a grand event in the Kremlin to sign the deeds on 4 bits of Ukraine that he's failed to take militarily, so instead he has stolen via fraudulent referendums. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is the single most important fact in disrupting the supply of energy to the rest of the world and pushing up prices to phenomenal levels. And I'm delighted to say that joining me live now from Ukraine is Lesia Vasilenko, Ukrainian MP and People's Deputy in Ukraine. We spoke yesterday and I'm thrilled to bits that you're able to join us again. You've had time to reflect upon that lavish ceremony that we discussed yesterday. But have you also had time to reflect on this urgent application from President Zelensky to join NATO? If NATO accepts that, it fundamentally changes everything.
just to be brief on the NATO application, Ukraine has done exactly what Finland and Sweden have done. We have applied under the same procedure. If they can, so can we. There shouldn't be exceptions from exceptions. We have proved as a country that we are standing by NATO values, that we are proceeding on NATO standards, that we are able to use the same weapons, that we are able to train together with other NATO troops, and we actually have a lot to contribute to NATO becoming a stronger organization. And actually, I think that for the benefit of NATO countries and for the benefit of Ukraine and overall peace and security, it's better for Ukraine to become a member state and to unite efforts to quench down Russia's aggression once and for all, than to keep playing the political game and go into year-long discussions about whether Ukraine merits or doesn't merit to be part of NATO. That's the part on NATO. The part on reflecting about what actually happened in Moscow and the annexation, well, actually, it looks like Putin was playing another one of his psychological games. I just analyzed how I felt and what the whole world was talking about yesterday. Well, the whole world was talking about the sham referendum, the yet another crime committed by Russia, which is the crime of annexation, and the increase of civilian death toll in Ukraine because of Russian missile launches. But the whole world was silent on the fact that Ukrainian army was continuing the advances in the east of Ukraine, that we actually almost regained Liman, which is an area in the northeast of Ukraine, which is a critical one for holding the Luhansk region and for holding also the Donetsk region in Ukraine. The whole world has been silent on the fact that Ukrainian army is advancing very confidently down in Kherson, and it is likely that we will be regaining the territories in Kherson within the next week. And this was, I think, the main goal of Putin, to distract both Ukrainians, the international community, and Russians from the fact that Ukraine is actually winning, and there's no way to postpone or to make sure that victory for Ukraine doesn't happen.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating, because I put my hand upon my heart and swear to you that the next words that are up here and in my notes are, it is reported this morning that your forces are surrounding the Russian-held town of Lyman in Donetsk. What is the latest? You've just answered that, but you're right, it's not widely reported elsewhere. But what you said to me yesterday, and it was ringing in my head when I read that news report this morning, was you said this will spark resistance, not only the Ukrainian army saying we're going to have that back, it's ours, it's not Russian, but also local people who live in those regions like Donetsk. They will fight back like the French resistance in the Second World War. That started.
Well, absolutely. I mean, with Ukraine army advancing, the people on the territories that are occupied or that are now being proclaimed from the Kremlin as Russian, the people are going, of course, to have a confidence to fight back. Because it's one thing to resist for years and years until the end of your life. It's another thing to resist for a couple of days, knowing well enough that reinforcement is coming, and that reinforcement is wearing Ukrainian uniform and carrying NATO standard weapons.
Yeah. Lesia, thank you so much for finding time to talk to me 2 days running. I'm deeply honoured. And as I always say to you and your colleagues, take care of yourselves and keep in touch with us. And thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you.
Lesia Vasilenko there, Ukrainian Member of Parliament and People's Deputy in Ukraine. Joining me now to reflect a little bit about what we were talking at the beginning of the programme, i.e. budgetary matters, but also Ukraine, crucially, is Niall Gardner, good friend of mine, foreign policy analyst, and also, of course, former aide to Margaret Thatcher, who runs the foundation out there in Washington. I'm going to reverse my questions because Lesia was just so important in what she said there about NATO. With Zelensky saying, we want to join NATO, we want to do it urgently, and Lesia saying we've bound ourselves by all of the rules, we agree with the philosophy, we are entitled to be there and be trained by NATO. If NATO says yes, it changes everything, doesn't it, Niall?
Well, Alastair, thank you very much for having me on the show today. And this is an extraordinary, of course, request by Ukraine. It's certainly, I think the pace of this request has exceeded expectations. I think, on both sides of the Atlantic. And certainly, of course, if Ukraine became a NATO member, it would be a massive, massive game changer. I think, however, in reality, it's very unlikely that we're going to see Ukraine becoming a NATO member in the near term. I think in the longer term, I think there's a strong possibility that Ukraine could become a member of the NATO alliance. But in the immediate term, I don't think there is going to be very strong support for that across the board in the NATO alliance. So, for example, the French and the Germans, I think, would balk at this idea. In Washington, there's been a cool reception from the Biden administration, also from figures such as Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House of Representatives. So I don't think that this is going to happen anytime soon. But as a long-term goal and aspiration, I think certainly Ukraine has a strong chance of becoming eventually a NATO member. I don't think it's going to happen in the immediate term. The emphasis, I think, from Ukraine's allies in the West will be upon continuing to supply defensive weaponry to the Ukrainians to help them to defend themselves and, of course, to liberate their own territory from Russian invasion and aggression. So I think that is going to be the immediate focus coming from the United States, from the UK and other NATO allies.
Crisp answer. I fear you're right, which may disappoint Lesia and others there, but I think your analysis is crystal clear. The other thing that broke overnight and is being written up widely this morning is the United Nations General Secretary, Antonio Guterres, saying, and I quote, "In this moment of peril, I must underscore my duty as Secretary General to uphold the Charter. The Charter is clear. Any annexation of a state's territory by another state resulting from the threat or use of force is a violation of the principles of the Charter and international law." Full stop. Tragically, full stop. They're going to do nothing about it, though, are they?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, the right message being sent by the United Nations here, but in reality, of course, and the UN, remains basically a bystander in terms of what's happening here. Without a doubt, what we're seeing from Vladimir Putin and the Russian regime is continuing aggression, barbarism, savagery, completely unacceptable. The only thing that is going to stop, Russia from succeeding in its goals is the resolve, I think, of the free world to stand up to Putin's monstrously evil regime. And the best way to do that, of course, is to continue to support the Ukrainian people in their defense, actually, and supplying them with the weaponry that they need to defeat the Russians and to liberate their own country. It's good to see the UN Secretary General making these statements, but as we know, of course, the Russians have a veto within the UN Security Council. They've exercised that veto just again this week. The Chinese, of course, remaining or abstaining actually from the UN votes. It's significant actually that China's not actually voting with Russia, though, so that's an important development. But in reality, the action is taking place on the ground in Ukraine. The Ukrainians are winning the war against the Russians. The Russians are in retreat. Putin is increasingly a desperate dictator, and this whole idea of annexing two regions and two self-styled republics in Ukraine, this is all going to end in failure on the part of the Russians. I think the Ukrainians will.
I'm afraid we've talked too much about Ukraine. I don't know what you're doing tomorrow, because either you're busy or my producer will beat me up after the programme. But I really do want to talk to you about the Liz Truss Kwasi Kwarteng budget. We don't have time now. Can we touch base and see whether we can?
Tomorrow.
You are?
Yes, I
am.
Yes, I'll be delighted to talk about that. Yes.
Game on, booked, and she hasn't told me off you. All right, I look forward to that. I'm grateful for your time. Thank you very much indeed. Niall Gardner there, giving really important comments on Ukraine and on NATO and the UN. Now, to cope with the living squeeze, the government has set up that range of support for businesses, charities and public sector organisations I mentioned at the top of the programme. Meanwhile, the independent energy research firm Cornwall Insight estimates that the scheme will cost the government £25 billion. Our national reporter Theo Chikomba has more.
Libraries are often a place to come and delve into a book, but here there's more. Suffolk libraries are opening their doors to meet the needs of communities across the county, as the cost of living increases.
Our colleagues who work at all of our sites spend every day chatting to people in the local community and understanding what their needs are. And a lot of those conversations obviously are people talking about their, definite concerns about the cost of living and the rising pressures on their own personal budgets.
And that's why they're expanding their services here in Ipswich, where they're seeing more people come for financial and emotional support.
Especially of late, people coming in and using the food banks and talking to us, and it is heartbreaking to see that people are suffering, but at the same time it's very rewarding that they know that they can come to the library as a safe, warm environment and they will be offered some support and kindness. I think at the moment, with prices and everything going up, the one thing we can give for free is kindness and support.
From today, the wholesale energy price will be discounted for 6 months. Prices will be fixed at £211 per megawatt per hour for electricity and £75 per megawatt per hour for gas, which the government say is less than half of the wholesale prices anticipated this year. Meanwhile, in London, this church near Covent Garden turned on their heating for the first time this week as temperatures are starting to drop. Their main source of heating is oil, which isn't capped. But will the discount for their electricity and gas help their bills to go down?
We hope that some of that offset from electricity and gas will set off some of the cost of the oil. So it is going to make a difference to us. What size that's going to be, we don't know yet, but it will make some difference. It all depends on what all costs look like and how much we have to use to keep the building warm.
The scheme has been welcomed by many businesses and organisations who feared sharp rises this winter. But industry experts still question what will happen after New Year when the government reviews who will be eligible for support in the long term. Theo Chikomba, GB News.
Fascinating stuff, and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends. Lots more coming up on the programme in our second hour. More on that all-important energy price cap. Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng will meet with the Office for Budget Responsibility again on Friday. But first, we're going to take a quick break to take us up to the top of the hour.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Hello and welcome, or hello and welcome back if you've been with us since 12, but a warm welcome if you've just joined us. It's 1 minute past 1 and a few seconds. I am Alastair Stewart and I'll be keeping you company here on TV and radio, GB News, for the next hour. Coming up, we'll continue to reflect upon the fallout from that budget. What is Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng's plan supposed to achieve? Can he still achieve it? And what's it doing particularly to property, mortgages and the pensions industry? I'll be asking how it affects you and what is going to be done. We've got a couple of experts coming up, I'm delighted to say. Plus, Britain goes off the rails again on yet another day of strikes. We'll be getting more of that picture right across the country, which we did in the first hour. But first, let's bring you right up to date with the rest of the news today. Here's Tatiana Sanchez.
Thank you, Alastair. Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 1. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. Householders are being advised to take a photograph of their meter readings today as energy prices rise to record levels. Regulator Ofgem says it could help to avoid being overcharged. The new price cap is now in place, with a typical household expected to spend around £2,500 a year, up from £1,971. The figure was expected to be £1,000 higher without the government's energy bill relief scheme. Energy consultant Catherine Porter told us ultimately the public will still pay.
In the short term, the government's going to pay for that by borrowing more money, but eventually that's going to have to be recovered through taxation. As we move through the next few years and after the end of this support scheme, prices will have come down. I don't think there's anybody who believes that prices won't be declining at that point. And I'm sure the government will reassess the situation when this 2-year scheme expires to see if more support is needed.
The Chancellor has defended his mini-budget, saying the government had to do something different to spark the economy. Writing in the Daily Telegraph, Kwasi Kwarteng insisted he'll produce a credible plan to get public finances back on track by tightly controlling public spending. The comments come after the Prime Minister admitted the government's strategy has caused disruption and warned the country faces a difficult winter. Train drivers are striking today over paid jobs and conditions, with only 11% of services running across the UK and some areas having no trains running at all. Members of the ASLEF, RMT and TSSA unions have walked out for 24 hours, with Network Rail urging the public to only travel if necessary. The strikes are set to cause major disruption to thousands of people planning to take part in the London Marathon tomorrow. RMT Union Secretary-General Mick Lynch says they will strike until they reach an agreement.
There will be more action like this because people in Britain are being made deliberately poorer by this government every day of the week, and we've got to rebalance that. This is part of that campaign. We're going to get a deal for our members through negotiation, but supported by strike action. So it is working. It's costing the government £30 million every time we go on strike, and they're subsidising these companies to keep this going. If they change their position, we can get a negotiated settlement, and that will be a win for every worker in this country.
Royal Mail workers have begun day 2 of their 48-hour strike in a long-running dispute over pay and conditions. Members of the Communication Workers Union have formed picket lines outside delivery and sorting offices, affecting deliveries right across the country. A further 19 days of strikes have been announced on throughout October and November. Russia has vetoed a United Nations resolution condemning Moscow's illegal annexation of 4 areas of Ukraine. It comes after President Putin declared that people living in Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson and Zaporizhia would become Russian citizens following recent so-called referendums. Meanwhile, Ukraine's military claims to have encircled over 5,000 Russian troops in the eastern town Lyman, a key step in liberating the Donbass region. South Korea's military says North Korea has fired 2 missiles towards the sea today, its 4th launch in a week. It comes just a day after South Korea, the US and Japan staged joint anti-submarine exercises for the first time in 5 years. The launch is seen as ratcheting up tension around the Korean peninsula. New figures show there's been a decrease in the number of NHS dentists right across England, with shortages impacting rural and deprived areas the most. Data shows no local authority area in the country has more than one dentist providing NHS treatment per 1,000 people. There are also wide variations in the availability of NHS dentists, with the City of Westminster having over 6 times the number of NHS dentists per 1,000 population compared with Nottinghamshire. The Local Government Association is calling on the government to address shortages in NHS dentistry. Landlords in Scotland who own Airbnb-style short-term lets now have until April the 1st next year to get licensed, or they won't be able to take any guests. The Scottish Government says safety standards will be improved as a result of that scheme. Hosts will now be required to take fire and gas safety precautions and have buildings and public liability insurance. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Alastair, it's back to you.
Tatiana, thank you very much indeed. We're going to return to our top story that also featured in Tatiana's bulletin there, the UK economy. And I want to weave in serious concerns about pensions and property. One of the most dramatic moments earlier this week is the Bank of England's intervention in the bond markets, because there were serious concerns that to maintain its financial viability, the mortgage industry was going to have to start selling bonds at a huge loss, ultimately challenging its ability to pay out on private pensions. We'll be talking to an expert in that field a little later in the programme. But at the very beginning of the programme, and that's why I did seriously say to you, if you don't subscribe to us on YouTube, you need to, because we spoke to Julian Jessup, who supports the budget and had a big input into many of the measures. But we also spoke to former Conservative Minister and MP, obviously, Sir Alan Duncan. He was scathing about the way the government had approached the announcement and described it as a colossal disaster. Let me just remind you, if you were listening earlier, and if you haven't heard it before, hang on to your hats and listen to this. This is some of what Alan Duncan had to say.
Was it just sort of cleared the decks, I think, of all of those sort of irritating taxes a lot of Conservatives over the last 15 or so years have not liked, but at the wrong time in the wrong way, and into markets which were fragile and jittery. And so it has been a colossal disaster. There was no explanation or philosophical justification made in advance that he'd sacked the permanent secretary of the Treasury. So it looked like ill-judged arrogance, and I'm afraid the judgment of people is going to be very, very harsh. And the issue we'll come to in a minute, I think, is that judgment just going to evaporate over time? Or is it now so deeply entrenched in their thinking that there's no way back for the government?
Catastrophic from Labour, catastrophic from the City, utterly catastrophic from a former cabinet minister who clearly, Lettuce, I asked you to pop back in, and you have done. Thank you very much indeed. I mean, Alan comes from a slightly different wing of the party, but on a number of issues, social issues, he's as libertarian as you are. Can Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng claw their way back from that kind of judgment from a former cabinet minister, let alone what's being said in the City?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt there has been some serious mistakes in the way that this has played out. I think he makes a really important point there that there were things that could have been done differently. For example, that 40p top rate of income tax. There was no need to announce that now.
Sure.
The weekend before...
Only butt in, because I think people genuinely will be quite shocked that Julian Jessup said that as well.
Yeah.
And he's a director of the Institute of Economic Affairs whose mantra, philosophy and thing this is all about. Even he said the timing was inept.
Exactly. Especially as well as it was just before the Labour Party conference weekend. It sort of gave them this own goal. But also, it's not going to be introduced anyway until April next year. So announcing it now merely gives them what we're seeing, a sort of rising within the Conservative Party of these rising tensions. So there are current whispers going on that some Conservative MPs are interacting with Labour MPs to try and stop this from going through.
I've read that, and the Telegraph have done a big bit on it, and I frankly thought that was that was probably nonsensical. But what I do think, and we talked about it a little earlier, is that there are a number of people. I mean, Mel Stride is one of them, who is the Conservative chair of the Treasury Select Committee, and a big Rishi Sunak backer are basically saying, look, he was right then and you are wrong now. But that's out there for... I mean, I think the idea of Tory backbenchers linking up with Labour seems to me to be quite crazy. But here's the political point. You and I established earlier on in our first conversation that on a lot of the measures we are as one. Duncan agrees with some of the measures, not all of them. Jessup obviously agrees with all of those as well. But the challenge now for Liz Truss is if she changes her mind, she's dead in the water. If she doesn't change her mind, she's potentially dead in the water.
The stakes are so much higher now than I think that she can imagine. She cannot do a U-turn on this. Not only because then people will associate the loss of control of our finances with these sort of economic principles, and it might even be potentially decades until another government would even test the water to implement them again. So her doing a U-turn now is absolute no.
Yeah, I mean, that's why it was so, we played that little clip, because right at the beginning of it, Alan Duncan said, a lot of people within the party have been waiting to do this for ages.
Yeah.
And there's commonality upon that point. It was all about timing.
Yeah, it was all about timing. And we've seen also with the ONS figures, it wasn't all the government to blame, I don't think, here in their timing. So we had ONS figures predicting that we would be in a recession second quarter. And only just this week it's come out that, in fact, we were not in a recession. Instead of at 0.1, it was 0.2. And then, as we said earlier, the Bank of England should have been raising interest rates gradually over time, rather than what we're seeing now, which is a sort of dangerous situation of increasing hikes very rapidly, very quickly, and meaning people can't keep up.
There's also a lot of people out there, and John Redwood is one of them, who I follow on social media, and he said, oh, yeah, ONS, brilliant. Look at what their predictions were of inflation last time and demanding action on borrowing, this, that and the other. Neither the ONS or the Office of Budget Responsibility or the Bank of England have a perfect track record. Occasionally, ministers have to be ministers and governments have to govern.
Well, completely. And you know who else hasn't helped this situation at all is the IMF, who decided to weigh in earlier this week in saying that what these tax cuts were doing was creating inequality. But that's not at all their position in this. And actually, quite frankly, I think they should apologise to us, because that would have also pushed down the value on the pound at a time when we were experiencing market volatility.
I stuck my head above the parapet on that particular one, and I was discussing it with old mate of mine, Mark Seddon, who's on the left. Labour Party man, used to edit Tribune magazine, and we were mulling over whether it was actually ultra-vires outside of the responsibilities of the IMF. I mean, if we go to the IMF cap in hand, as Labour had to in 1976, they can say, you can have money if you do this, this, this and this. But to intervene and say, we're not quite sure that what you're doing now is right, seemed to me to be against the rules.
I completely agree. I think it was pretty outrageous, actually. And they didn't say it to Ireland, for example, when they decided to cut their top rate of tax to 40%. So I don't know why they're saying it now. That's not their role. And it did have implications on our sterling.
Great to see you. Thanks for coming in, both at 12 o'clock and just now. You've really cast a great deal of thoughtful light on these matters, not just as a young thinking person, but as someone who really does know what she's talking about. I hope you come back and see us again soon.
Of course, of
Brilliant.
course.
Thank you very much indeed. That was Lettice there, Brawonsky, giving her views on the budget and other matters. As promised in my conversation with Lettice Brawonsky, our next guest is the pensions man. It's Tom McPhail, a pensions expert with over 20 years' experience working in a number of companies. So he's not like one of those people saying, oh, I'm going to sell you this product because it's the best one. And at the back of his mind, he's thinking, that's the best. He knows what he is talking about, and that's why we want him on board. That close-run thing, first of all, on liquidity, which both Julian Jessup and Alan Duncan were talking about at the top of the programme. How worried were you as an expert in the field that it could have gone Johnny Rotten?
It was clearly a tense moment. I don't think we'll ever know for sure within individual pension schemes how edgy it got. The problem we had was that the final salary pension schemes, the gold-plated, the best pension schemes, the ones that guarantee you an income in retirement, they pursue investment strategies that ensure they've got the money available in 10, 20, 30 years' time to pay people's retirement incomes, and they do that very well. but they're not well adapted to sudden movements in the market. And as you were just discussing with your last guest with Lettuce, when the government did their mini budget last Friday, the markets moved really quickly. That forced those pension schemes to have to liquidate assets to create cash margins for themselves. And the problem was the assets they were selling were the long-dated gilts. That exacerbated the problem, and there was the risk of the downward spiral. So the Bank of England steps in. So the big picture, those pension schemes are still secure. So in that respect, we were never that worried. But it got pretty edgy, and if the Bank of England hadn't stepped in, it would have just kept going down. And it was
Tom, I loved in my briefing notes overnight from the team. They quoted you to me saying, "Don't panic, ... yet." But as the oldest member of the team, I panicked.
So, no, I think definitely don't panic. And I think, it's good that we've now achieved a degree of stability. Sterling has recovered, something that's not been widely reported in these last few days. The government, as Lettuce was just saying, has dug a hole for itself. They need this strategy of growth to pay off. So in the longer term, things may still not be all right. In the shorter term, things have stabilised. Those final salary pension schemes are still secure. They do still have employers pouring money into them. So in that respect, definitely don't panic right now. They're okay. I mean, there are other interesting effects that the last week have had on pension schemes more generally, and particularly personal pensions, private pensions, where you don't get the same guarantees. We've seen some significant falls there that are most likely to affect people very close to retirement, the people who can least afford to suddenly suffer significant market losses. And ironically, they will have suffered those losses precisely because their money was moved into the government debt, the very assets that were supposed to most protect them from volatility. So things have gone a bit wrong there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as I think it was Lettuce herself said earlier on about gilt edge, they're supposed to be the gilts thing. I'm going to leave the last minute and a half to state pensioners because I want to touch base with you on that. But one final quick point then to roll all of that together. If you are a private pensioner, whether you're someone like Lettuce just beginning to build up a pension pot or someone like me dipping into it towards the end of full retirement or what have you, are there things that we should do right now, or do we just sit back quietly and keep our fingers crossed?
The latter strategy is an acceptable one, Alastair. I would encourage people to be a little bit more involved, to take an interest in where their money is invested, how big their pot is, to think about how and when they're going to want to draw money out. And as you said with Lettuce, clearly a long way in the future, so less immediate concern. But find out where your money is invested and understand why your money has been invested in the way that it has, because that gives you more control and that allows you to make decisions for yourself, which generally it is likely to be a good thing for you.
Brilliant. And finally, then, state pensioners, who, of course, there'll be people at home saying, yeah, they're banging on about rich people with private pension pots and the rest of it. The vast majority have only the state pension going way back, although that terrain is changing slightly now. When we last spoke, we talked about the triple lock, and the newspapers are full of people like Simon Clarke, the number 2 at the Treasury, saying we've got to look at benefits, we've got to look at welfare spending. In your view and what you're hearing, are state pensioners safe in being protected against high rates of inflation, or should they be worried?
There are 2 political decisions here. One relates to the state pension, where I think there is a risk that because of the corner the government has backed themselves into, they've got to look for spending cuts. And perhaps, having done it once already recently, they may come back again and say, look, I'm really sorry, pensioners, you're getting higher interest rates now, so you're getting more interest on your investments and your savings. We can all afford to take a bit of a cut on the state pension, maybe for a year or 2. So I think that triple lock could come under pressure. And then I think the other area they might look at is the tax reliefs that everybody gets on the money they pay into their private pensions, where, again, very large sums of money involved, and they might come and nibble away at that again.
Finally, and it's a comment from me to you, but I just underline it's Tom McPhail. Look him up, follow him. He's absolutely brilliant on this subject. But if they increase the amount that you can put into a pension pot and get tax relief out of it, and don't do the triple lock for state pensioners, that will be chapter 42 of political ineptitude in bold capitals. Fingers crossed. Tom, always a pleasure. Keep in touch. Always good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Tom McPhail giving it absolutely straight there for private pensioners, people towards the end of their working lives, at the beginning of them, and vitally for the vast majority of you state pensioners. We will keep across that story as it develops, I promise you faithfully. The other worrying side effect to all of this budget stuff is the housing market and, of course, our mortgages. We've touched upon that already. We are in very safe hands with my next guest, however. Richard Blanco is a property expert and a bit of a broadcaster himself, so you will hear loud and clear exactly what he's got to say. Richard, it's always great to see you. Mortgages, is the market really approaching meltdown?
Good afternoon, Alastair. No, it isn't. And, I think there's been a lot of hyperbole on mortgages this week. I mean, yes, it's been a very tricky week if you're about to take out a mortgage and if you're about to buy a property, because certainly about 40% of products were withdrawn. But they were withdrawn because lenders weren't quite sure what the market was doing, and they were really waiting for it to settle down until they bring out new products. Now, they have started to bring out new products. We're looking at fixes of around 4% now from some of the lenders, around 3% for variable rates. And, if you're not having to change your mortgage until next year, and something like 1.3 million people have fixes that will come to an end next year, then the thing to be doing really is to be looking at what your current lender's products look like and starting to think ahead. We're hoping that rates will peak at some point next year. We're just not quite sure how high they will peak. People think it's between about 5 or 6%, but things have definitely calmed down in the last couple of days.
And my question was going to be, what's your advice on the 1.3 million people whose fixed-term mortgages come to an end next year? You've answered it perfectly, so I will now move on to my next question is, what is your advice? You're an expert, but you are genuinely impartial. That matters to me and to my viewers and listeners. To first-time buyers right now, it's a nightmare gathering a deposit. They're now looking at a moving, fluctuating market. Someone comes and sits down and says, Richard, what do I do?
Well, yes, what's going to be tricky for first-time buyers now is affordability. Are they going to be able to afford those expensive mortgages? And typically, if they're putting down a 5% deposit, then they're going to have a 95% mortgage. It may well be that lenders start to withdraw those sorts of products as well because they're nervous about where the market is going. I think what's also going to be interesting is whether we see price falls over the next year. Some commentators are starting to talk about 15% price falls. So it might be better for first-time buyers just to hold on, stay in the rental market or stay with mum and dad for a little bit longer and just see what's happening with the market. Certainly a lot of buyers have been spooked now, and we're seeing a lot of deals have a big question mark sort of raised over whether or not they will go through because people feel the market is turning.
Absolutely fascinating. So you need to buy a roof over your head, if that's the motivation for an awful lot of people, and hurrah for that. But that which they want to buy may well now be drifting down slightly in price. I mean, you're a property owner as well as an expert on it, and I've read lots of pretty apocalyptic pieces about the rental sector and valuations declining there.
Yes, I mean, it's very hard to say at the moment, but I would say that if we're going to see fewer people buying, we're likely to see more people staying in the rental market. So I would suggest that rental prices would probably hold up over the next couple of years. They tend to be sort of counter-cyclical. When house prices come down, rents can start to go up a bit because more people are relying on the rental market. I mean, what I would say is, if you're buying a home to live in, then of course, you should expect to hold that asset for at least 5 years. And if you're going to live in it, then, it doesn't matter too much if it goes up or down. If you're going to stay there for longer than 5 years and you really need to move in the next few months, then probably the best advice is to go for it. But if you're kind of speculating and hoping that you might make some money in the next few years, then it's certainly a very tricky market at the moment.
Sure, understood. Final question is this. Markets are markets. Everything has a price and every seller has a buyer. But I read this morning the emergence of 40-year mortgages, longer-term mortgages. The market itself is looking at itself and trying to figure out how it keeps going, because if the whole thing collapses, they collapse as well. So it is a vibrant market as well.
Yes, it is. I mean, we're actually seeing swap rates for longer mortgages. The swap rates are what lenders base their fixed rate mortgages on. So 5 and 10-year swap rates are cheaper than 2-year swap rates at the moment. So some lenders have withdrawn their 2-year fixes and are just selling 5-year fixes at the moment. And as you say, there are some longer fixes around. I would personally be a little bit wary of fixing for too long because we don't know how long this is all going to go on for. Most people think that in a couple of years' time, rates will start to fall again. So you don't want to lock yourself in at too high a rate for too long. That would be my advice. And also do consider a variable rate at the moment, because it might be best just to sit on a standard variable rate for a few months until things kind of calm down.
Well, Richard, if it's good enough for the Leader of Her Majesty's Opposition, it may well be good enough for people out there, because I think that's what Sir Keir Starmer has got. Always a pleasure, Richard. Thank you very much indeed for your time. I hope you have a lovely Saturday afternoon. That's Richard Blanco, Blanco. Look him up. He really does know his stuff. And he, like my pensions expert, is impartial. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. We've lots more to come on this afternoon's programme at 26 minutes past 1. Have your plans been changed today by the rail strike? Many services have been disrupted and cancelled due to workers staging more strikes over pay and working conditions today. Our reporters are around the country and they will bring you the latest. But first, let's bring you up to date with the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK will see a mix of sunshine and blustery showers with some heavy downpours in places. Here are the details. Most of the showers in Scotland will affect northern and western areas, where they'll be accompanied by strong and gusty winds. Meanwhile, Inverness will join many eastern parts with a brighter afternoon. A fair few showers will rattle eastwards across Northern Ireland, generally feeling cool in the breeze with highs of just 16 degrees. The northwest of England will also have a cool and showery afternoon, but northeast England will be more sheltered and should have more sunshine. Scattered showers across Wales and mostly confined towards the north and west. In the sunnier spells towards the south and east, it shouldn't feel too bad despite the breeze. Occasional showers are possible across the Midlands, but some places in the east should stay dry. There'll be some bright or sunny spells, lifting temperatures to around 17 or 18 Celsius. Plenty of bright weather is on the cards across East Anglia as well, with just an outside chance of a shower feeding across in the westerly breeze. For the south coast of England, it looks rather cloudy with a few showers, but head a little inland and it should be mostly dry, with the sun appearing at times. Into the evening, blustery showers will persist in the northwest, but elsewhere it will become largely dry, with clear periods, and that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Good afternoon, it's 1:30. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. Householders are being advised to take a photograph of their meter readings today as energy prices rise to record levels. Regulator Ofgem says it could help to avoid being overcharged. The new price cap is now in place, with a typical household expected to spend around £2,500 a year, an increase of around £530. The Chancellor has defended his mini-budget, saying the government had to do something different to spark the economy. Writing in the Daily Telegraph, Kwasi Kwarteng insisted he'll produce a credible plan to get public finances back on track by tightly controlling public spending. The comments come after the Prime Minister admitted the government's strategy has caused disruption. Train drivers are striking today over paid jobs and conditions, with only 11% of services running across the UK and some areas having no trains at all. Members of the ASLEF, RMT and TSSA unions have walked out for 24 hours, with Network Rail urging the public to only travel if necessary. The strikes are set to cause major disruption to thousands of people planning to take part in the London Marathon tomorrow. Russia has vetoed a United Nations resolution condemning Moscow's illegal annexation of 4 areas of Ukraine. It comes after President Putin declared that people living in Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson and Zaporizhia would become Russian citizens following recent so-called referendums. Meanwhile, Ukraine's military claims to have encircled over 5,000 Russian troops in the eastern town of Lyman, a key step in liberating the Donbas region. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Tatiana, thanks very much indeed. It's 28 minutes to 2. We're into the slightly less than the last half hour of the programme. Transport union leaders say that they've no choice over a mass walkout, which has brought the rail network to a halt today. Members of 4 trade unions are striking for 24 hours over jobs, pay and pensions, causing the worst rail disruption of the year so far. Network Rail have described it as an own goal. So let's travel north now to our Yorkshire and Humber reporter, Anna Riley, who is there for us live in Leeds with the ASLEF picket line behind you. What's the mood like there, Anna?
Good afternoon, Alastair. Yes, I'm joining you in a very rainy Leeds. There's been hundreds of people that have turned out. There's, as you say, the 4 different union organisations, as well as the Enough is Enough protesters. They are turning out in protest against the cost of living, demanding that the government do more to help people. And another significant figure that was here at the picket line earlier was the local MP for Leeds East, Richard Bergen, and this is what he had to say.
I'm here in Leeds to show support for the RMT members and the ASLEF members who are taking strike action to defend jobs, pay, terms and conditions. And they're being treated really badly by the government. I think it's really important that when they're being treated in the way they are by their bosses and when they're being treated in the way they are by the government, that people like myself join people from our community and show support to these workers in this cost of living emergency, because people are really struggling to make ends meet. No one takes strike action at the drop of a hat. People take strike action as a last resort. It's difficult to take strike action. People lose pay, it's stressful, and I'm here to support them.
Yes, so words there from Richard Bergen, the Labour MP for Leeds East. He also gave a speech here along with other union members. There's been a calm mood here. I did ask as well about the rail disruption. Like you say, it's the worst of the year. They did apologise for people having to make different plans, but they said this is what they need to do, this is how they feel they stand up to the government and get their aims across.
Thank you very much indeed. And through you, thanks to Mr Bergen for expressing his views as well. Anna Riley there in Leeds. Now, you've also been getting in touch on our main topic of the day, mortgages. And Mark says, when I bought my first house, the rates went up to 14%. People have had it too easy for too long, and here they are moaning at 4%. Really? Karen says, I remember those days too. I agree that 4%'s not unreasonable. The must-have-it-alls are making themselves unhappy with unrealistic expectations. The only thing I've said much the same yesterday and got hammered on social media for it. The only thing I would point out is that you do need to look at average earnings and multiples and house prices. But I still maintain that if you stick it all together, what many of us went through at the end of the 1980s and survive by working hard and putting the effort in, you can get through it. That's the observation. Clive says, my mortgage was more than my salary. We took in tenants. The mortgage increase was kept in a separate account by my building society, and after several months, about £10,000 worth of debt was added to my mortgage. So there we are. Keep those thoughts coming in, and we'll share some more if we have time before the end of the programme. And don't forget, subscribe to our YouTube channel at GB News for all of the previous interviews that I think, particularly today, you may find enlightening. Now, having been in Leeds, let's go to King's Cross on the rail strike, where our reporter Alice Porter, our London reporter, is. And it's a big weekend, obviously, with the marathon taking place tomorrow, but little or nothing happening there today in terms of people going in or getting out.
Yes, that's right, Alastair. There are no trains running from London to major cities such as Bristol and Brighton and Edinburgh. And of course, for people who are travelling today to go and pick up their packs for the start of the London Marathon, which begins tomorrow, that's going to make it incredibly difficult. And that's a real challenge for people who are going to be taking place in the race tomorrow, because there's the knock-on effect tomorrow as well. Because of no trains running today, there's going to be a knock-on effect happening tomorrow. And across the country, there's only 11% of services are running. Because of these strikes, the action happening for the first time ever, we've got representatives coming from all the train unions. So it's got 54,000 members who are taking part. Now, I was asking the General Secretary of the RMT union, Mike Lynch, about these strikes, and this is what he had to say.
There will be more action like this because people in Britain are being made deliberately poorer by this government every day of the week, and we've got to rebalance that. This is part of that campaign. We're going to get a deal for our members through negotiation, but supported by strike action. So it is working. It's costing the government £30 million every time we go on strike, and they're subsidising these companies to keep this going. If they change their position, we can get a negotiated settlement, and that will be a win for every worker in this country.
There was Mick Lynch speaking to me there, but we've got more protests coming later on in the month, because a lot of the people who are protesting, it's very much, whilst the issues that are happening here at train stations are to do with issues over pay, it's also the timing of this being the 1st of October, on the same day that the energy price cap is going up to, for average households, £2,500, and it's something that a lot of people are struggling with, and that's why here at King's Cross we're not having protests from just different unions connected with train drivers. We've also got lots of other groups who are also coming, protesting about the cost of living. So a lot of things that the government, they're hoping that the government is going to address at the Tory party conference starting on Monday.
Alice, thank you very much indeed. Alice Porter there, live at King's Cross, including that interview that she recorded a little earlier with Mick Lynch, the General Secretary of the union. Alice is our London reporter. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, with plenty more still to come in the final 20 minutes of the programme, including Labour has surged to a record lead in the opinion polls after that mini-budget. I'll be speaking to Labour MP Graham Stringer to get his party's reaction. But first, a quick break.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back. It is 19 minutes to 2 and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News TV and radio. Before we end our conversation about the budget and the evident political mess that the government finds itself in, I wanted to have a Labour perspective as well. Prime Minister Liz Truss's disruption-inducing mini-budget has majorly boosted Labour's popularity. The opposition party has surged to record leads in multiple polls, including our own, in the wake of the economic turmoil in literally just the last 8 days. A YouGov Times poll placed Sir Keir Starmer's party 33 points ahead of the Conservatives, the largest lead for Labour in any recorded poll since 1998. GB News' People's poll, as I say, also put Labour on 50 and 30 ahead of the Conservatives. Now, I wanted a calm voice. I didn't want someone who was just going to sit around and stamp their feet and score points. And I'm delighted to say that Graham Stringer, who is the Labour MP for Blakely and Broughton, joins me now because that is the approach he tends to take. Good to see you, Graham, and thanks for finding time for us this Saturday afternoon. On that budget, I'm guessing that you will have constituents who quite welcome the reversal of the rise in national insurance and the prospect of a cut in income tax. But how does it kind of balance out with people getting in touch with you and turning up at the surgery?
Not so much on the national insurance issue. People are relieved that something is going to be done about fuel prices. But if I had to summarise my conversations with my constituents, it would be that they don't think it's enough. They're still frightened. Since I knocked on doors in the local elections last May, I would knock on doors, people would come and say, yes, I'm voting this way or that way, but what's going to happen about energy prices? I'm very worried, I'm very frightened. And that still is the view, because although the energy cap has been increased, some people will still find it extraordinarily difficult to meet those bills at the same time as food bills are going up and at the same time as wages in real terms are declining in value.
That's absolutely intriguing, and which is why I asked you that first question to as it were, put a toe in the water of what your constituents are feeling. An awful lot of other people in the leadership of the Labour Party have been banging on about scrapping the 45% top rate for the super rich and taking the bankers' bonuses off. But in your constituency, they're much more worried about sticking a plug in and being able to pay for a kettle of hot water.
Absolutely. Nobody, to be honest, nobody has mentioned the national insurance issue to me. In casual conversations, people are annoyed about the reduction of the 45% income tax, but it doesn't affect most of them. They don't see it, and if they think about it, the top level of income tax has been at 40 percentage points for a long time. So it irritates people. They think it's the wrong sign to send out, but they also, it's nothing to do with them really. It's just another irritation from this government that they found. They think it shows that the government don't understand that the situation they are in.
Do they see, we were just, while you were giving the tail end of that answer, Graham, we were running some pictures of Sir Keir Starmer at the party conference and obviously referring back to the question that I put to you. But I was particularly intrigued at one element of his speech, and it was a good speech, to be fair. There were bits I might criticise. But one bit I thought was intriguing was when he said that Great British Energy will be publicly owned. Do your constituents sense that the time has come for renationalisation, not least because, as you said, they are genuinely worried about those fuel bills, they're genuinely worried about being able to pay them? Is nationalisation the way forward?
Yes, that's certainly my view, and I think it's the view of many of my constituents. And rather surprisingly, it's a view of many people who have not voted Labour, in fact have voted Conservative in the past. They don't see why foreign governments should own many of our utilities, in particular at the moment, because people are very worried about it, energy utilities, but water utilities as well. So I have been to all-party meetings outside of Parliament. The majority of the audience there have not been Labour voters. And when I've said I think we should bring the utilities back into public ownership gradually because it would be expensive, I've rather surprisingly received rounds of applause.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going to go next, because I find that genuinely and objectively intriguing. A time comes, as Jim Callaghan, I think, famously once said, where the tide is going in a particular way and you can't turn it back. The Financial Times this morning, and I'm no great friend of Labour's, but on politics reasonably objective, they say this morning that Sir Keir is doing well, but not yet well enough, and that the party is still outpolling the leader. If I take your answer to my point about what your constituents are most worried about, i.e. straightforward electricity bills, and secondly, what you're hearing about the appetite for deep nationalisation and state control of these industries, we're not hearing enough from Keir Starmer on that front if he's going to pull round your people and pull round ordinary Labour supporters, are we? Is he frightened?
I think it is. I mean, I think it's true that governments lose elections. It's difficult for oppositions to win them. I think what the last week has done, disastrous for the country and disastrous for the Conservative Party, has clarified a lot of people's minds, people who decide to vote different ways in different general elections, that they're not going to vote Conservative. And it started, if you look closely at the opinion polls, to solidify the idea of Labour as an alternative government, because though it's not had much attention, it isn't just that the Tory polling has gone down and Labour's up. The Greens and the Lib Dems have gone down, which I think is an indication that people are making their mind up that Labour is now the alternative government. Where I agree with the central point of your question, it's not that Keir is frightened of taking difficult decisions. He's taken a number. It is that he is not yet crystallised in the public's mind in one sentence or one phrase who he is and precisely what Labour are going to stand for. And I think that's a really difficult thing to do. But that's what he has to do over the next 2 years, and hopefully it's a shorter period than that.
Graham, we have to end it there because we're inching up towards the top of the hour, and I don't want to fall off the end. But I'm genuinely grateful. I always enjoy talking to you for your balance and honesty, and thanks for finding time for us this Saturday afternoon. Graham Stringer there, Labour Member of Parliament for Blakely and Broughton. Back to our top story, and indeed Graham was talking about it there with great conviction, and that is the new energy price cap coming into force today. The rise is less in the price that you actually pay than had previously been expected, but it is still very significant. A typical household's energy bill will rise from £1,971 to an average £2,500. That's double what it was last winter. And no matter what anyone says, I believe the price of energy is at the heart of all of the cost of living crisis. I asked Malcolm Grimston to rejoin us on the programme. Malcolm is Senior Research Fellow at the Centre for Energy Policy and Technology at Imperial College in London. And there he is. Great to see you. Am I wrong about that? At the very heart of the cost of living crisis is the energy price, but there is beginning to be signs of some good news out there.
I think so, yes, as we are at the moment. We clearly have to watch out for mortgages, which potentially could swamp the size of the energy issue. But it's not just the bills we pay in our homes. Businesses need to use energy. Anything that needs to be moved around the country has to use energy. And all of those things add to the general rate of inflation, as well as the direct effects of our bills. Now, over the last couple of months, there are some signals that energy prices may have peaked internationally. The oil price is down something like not far short of a third of the peak that it reached 6 months ago. The gas price has edged down by not far short of that over the course really of the last couple of weeks. It's a fool's game to read a short-term change as being a long-term trend. But that coupled with genuine concerns of an international slowing of the world economy and therefore a reduction in demand for energy over what it might otherwise have been, we're already seeing it at the petrol pump. The prices have come down quite significantly in recent months.
Yeah, well, let's bank that and say hurrah. But it's interesting tying together what Graham Stringer, Labour MP, was just saying about in his constituency and just talking to ordinary people in his constituency, that they welcome the help from Her Majesty's government on paying their bills. But of course, by definition, it can never be enough. If it's going in the right direction, that is good. But you're a big advocate of nuclear power and addressing the supply side of this. That takes time. It strikes me that those prices are going to have to come down PDQ or we're still going to risk falling off the edge.
I mean, the real danger whenever you hit economic recession is that you stop investing in the longer term. And so you never get to the point where the next crisis that comes along, you've prepared for it. And the government speaks very sensibly about nuclear and other investments in energy, including strengthening the wire system, for example, which is all good news. But we do need to see that investment flowing in. And of course, that's going to be at exactly the time when it becomes more expensive to invest because international interest rates are growing. So there's no very easy answers here. I think one of the quotes from Nick Clegg when he was Deputy Prime Minister against nuclear power was this won't be generating until 2022. Looks really rather short-sighted now. So we have to make those long-term investments, but those long-term investments by definition are not going to get us through the next year or two. I personally have always felt that allowing energy prices to go up for people like me who can afford my bills, fortunately, is actually no bad thing. It means I take energy efficiency more seriously and the money is there for the next round of investment. So I think I would have targeted the help more tightly towards those in real energy poverty and allowed people like me to just, this is the nature of markets. Sometimes prices go up, sometimes they come down. And generally speaking, if you interfere in a market and prevent the normal cycle that results in investment and therefore prices naturally coming down, you're in real danger in the long term of actually causing as many problems as you solve.
Absolutely. I'm not sure I've ever asked you this before, and if I have, I apologise for it having slipped my memory. But are you for or against fracking?
I think it's certainly worth looking into it. If we can produce some of our gas domestically, just from general environmental reasons, if we're going to have a lot of wind or solar, we need a lot of gas because the wind doesn't always blow. The sun isn't always out, and we still need electricity at those times. I'm not convinced that it's going to be a game changer, actually. I don't know how big the resource is there. But it's very clear that it's nothing like the scale of the United States, where it really has been a game changer of enormous proportion. They've got vast areas of land where the geology is relatively simple compared to the UK, and of course where very few people live who would be disadvantaged by the development. So I think I would support that we look at the resource down there to find out what is actually there, and then let's have a discussion about how much that can help us. But I'm not convinced that this is going to be a real game changer.
No, I understand that, and it's a contributor, which takes me to my final question, and this is where I think our relationship began. We first talked about the very nature of regulation and the market. Per adventure, this energy market needs fundamental reform, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, funnily enough, one of the problems is there's been too much interference in the market. You can run electricity and energy sensibly with a state-controlled system taking all the decisions about plant investment. And on balance, I think that's probably the right way to go. You can run it sensibly by giving companies the confidence that if they make investments that start to earn money, they'll be allowed to keep a reasonable proportion of that money. Of course, it'll be taxed, but they'll be allowed to make a fair rate of return over the whole 30 years that typically an investment takes to pay back its initial outlay. What we've actually done is kind of set a market up, but then interfered with it so deeply and so consistently that companies have lost confidence in investing.
Yeah.
And there you get the worst of both worlds.
All right. What a brilliant way to end. It's always a pleasure, Malcolm. Thank you very much indeed for finding time for us. Take care, enjoy your weekend, and we'll look forward to talking to you again soon. Malcolm Grimston-Stringer there with his thoughts upon the energy market. Always absolute gold dust. That's it for me for today. I'll be back same time tomorrow, 12 till 2. We'll be discussing all things politics, again, as the Conservatives head off to Birmingham for their 2022 party conference. That'll be a ball. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK will see a mix of sunshine and blustery showers with some heavy downpours in places. Here are the details. Most of the showers in Scotland will affect northern and western areas, where they'll be accompanied by strong and gusty winds. Meanwhile, Inverness will join many eastern parts with a brighter afternoon. A fair few showers will rattle eastwards across Northern Ireland, generally feeling cool in the breeze with highs of just 16 degrees. The northwest of England will also have a cool and showery afternoon, but northeast England will be more sheltered and should have more sunshine. Scattered showers across Wales and mostly confined towards the north and the west.